I'm here today with Olugbemisola Rhuday Perkovich. Olugbemisola is author of several books, including Eighth Grade Superzero, a notable book for a global society and notable social studies trade book for young people. She's co-author of the NAACP Image Award nominated Two Naomis, a Junior Library Guild selection, and its sequel, Naomi's Two. Her nonfiction books include Above and Beyond, NASA's Journey to Tomorrow, and the picture book biography Someday is Now, Clara Luper and the 1958 Oklahoma City Sit-ins, a notable social studies trade book for young people. Olugbemisola is also the editor of The Hero Next Door, a 2019 middle grade anthology from We Need Diverse Books. She's a member of the Brown Bookshelf and We Need Diverse Books and lives with her family in New York City. You can visit her online at olugbemisolabooks.com. And thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Good, good. Well, we're going to be doing an online children's book conference soon. And I think we're both, really excited and looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But now, before we get into your books, can you tell us just a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I call myself a Jamaican Nigerian New Yorker. I was born in New York City in the Bronx. And then my family moved around a lot. So I was in a different school for every grade up until 7th grade.
Wow. Boy, that's a lot.
Yeah. It was a lot of being the new kid
Yes.
over and over again. But it helped me as a writer. I think it's still was really my foundation for my life as a writer, because I had to, as a kid, I had to really pay attention to sort of what the culture was in each school that I went to, and like what the hierarchies were, and sort of what to do and what not to do. And so all of that kind of noticing and paying attention to detail, I think, has been helpful for me.
Good training.
Yeah, definitely good.
I never would have thought of it that way, but I could totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it was definitely good training. And I was a very shy kid, and I was a big reader. Books were just like a big part of my family life. And I was also sort of allowed to be a free range reader. So we just had a lot of books at home, and I would just read whatever was there. So I read a lot of books that I totally didn't get or understand at the time, but I was able to just read them and just sort of enjoy stories and enjoy books. And my family, my parents and my grandparents, my mother's parents especially, told a lot of stories. So there was just a lot of storytelling. And my sister and I were not allowed to watch very much television. So books were a big deal.
Yeah, I could see why. So you've just come out with a couple of new books, but before we get to those, maybe you could tell us about some of your earlier books.
Sure. So my first book, which still is so close to my heart, is Eighth Grade Superzero. And that book, it came about in kind of a funny way. For a long time, I was working as a freelance writer because both my mom and sister had gotten very ill right around when I started college, actually. And so through college and right after, especially for my mom, I just really had to be home, or it would have been difficult to sort of have a very traditional 9-to-5 job schedule. And so the one thing I could do was write. I knew I could do was write. And I also did some teaching. So I did a lot of freelance writing, freelance educational writing, sort of freelance. I was like a literacy assistant coach and that kind of work, and like after school teaching work and that kind of thing. But all through that, I kept thinking that I wanted to write children's books, because books had been such an important thing for me, especially in sort of my middle grade years. I really wanted to sort of give that gift to other kids that I had gotten. but I just kept talking about like, oh, one day I'm going to write a children's book. One day I'm going to write a children's book. And then I went to grad school, like many, many years after. There were maybe 10 years between undergraduate and graduate school. So I was like an older grad student in education, doing educational technology, but still talking about writing children's books. And then it was like one of those things where like friends would ask or people would ask like, oh, so like, you still thinking about writing a children's book? And I was starting to feel like, oh, I'm going to be one of those people that says I'm going to write a book one day and
never get around to it, huh?
never actually does it. And then I found out that there was this workshop with Paula Danziger, who had been one of my favorite authors as a kid. And to get into the application was due the next day, and to get in, you had to send 3 pages or something like of something. So I just quickly got this image in my mind and wrote 3 pages and express mailed it to the workshop. So I got into the workshop, and in it, Paula was just really, really encouraging. Like, you should finish this. You should finish this. Like, this is a great start to a story. You should finish this. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to finish it. And then it was sort of that same thing where I was just doing other work, and in the back of my mind thinking like, yeah, one day I'm going to finish that story. And I had the opportunity to be in a workshop twice with Madeline L'Engle. And
Wow.
she was also an amazing teacher and just like very encouraging. So I just kept being that, yeah, one day I'm going to do it. I had my daughter, and then when she was about a little over a year, I had been going to a lot of writing conferences. I'd been learning a lot about the craft and about the business. So I had a lot of that knowledge. And one thing I had heard was that when you query agents and editors, it's going to take them like 6 months or a year to get back to you. So I got to this point where I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is, even though I still only have those first few pages and I don't really know what this story is going to be, if I send a query letter out, that'll motivate me. And then by the time I hear back from this one editor that I wrote to, by the time I hear back from her, I will have written the novel. And then I can, like, if she asks for something, I'll have something to send, and that's how it's going to work out. But what happened was I did the query letter, and I kind of made it sound like I had finished the book. And so she wrote back real quickly. It was like a little over a week later. And I just freaked out. But it also was like, I can't let this opportunity, like, God opened up this opportunity. I can't let it just pass by. So I took maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks to just write the rest of the book. Like,
wow.
So first draft. So first draft, and sent that. And fortunately, she liked it enough that we revised it more than a couple of times. We revised it, and I ended up after that getting an agent and then signing a contract, and that was how my first novel
Wow.
got published.
Now, what year did that come out?
It came out in 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, so over 10 years ago.
And was it middle grade or was it something else?
Yeah, it's upper middle grade, which is sort of, when I was writing, I wasn't really thinking about all those things. But like, because it's 8th grade, my characters are 13. It was in sort of a weird space where traditional middle grade is more like 10, 11, and then traditional young adult is usually 15, 16. So it's sort of in a weird space. And it's funny, my most recently published book is also upper middle grade. And I like that space. I love middle grade in general. And I feel like we need more upper middle grade books, because there are just kids in that range who want to read those stories. And it would be great to see more of them and to see, like when that came out, when 8th grade Superzero came out, there was a category where they would say like for ages 10 to 14, but I don't even think that that's very common anymore, which I think is too bad.
I think personally, my middle grade is when I did the most reading until recently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because by the time you get into high school, you got too many other things going on.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And then when I went to college, I went to engineering, which, completely destroyed my reading ability for anything else because I had to read that so slowly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I never really came back to reading, until I started reading business books.
Yeah.
And then now, I've been reading all the stuff from the authors who I work with, so.
Yeah.
But anyway, I totally agree with you, but I wish there were more really good.
Yeah. Middle grade was definitely the best part of my reading life. Like because it's like a period where you're reading for the joy of it, and you're also reading to kind of figure things out and figure life out in a very safe way, in a sense. So you might read about experiences that you haven't had or you don't know that you'll ever have.
Sure.
It's your way to kind of think about things and think through life.
What many of the Christian publishers and authors have told me too is that there aren't very many Christian books in that age range.
No, and it's funny because in 8th grade Superzero, I think in all of, it's a regular thing for me, sort of in like the families that I write and the characters that I write, where their faith is just like a part of their lives and they're going to church, or it's just a thing in their lives. And I also didn't realize that would be, so for a lot of people in 8th grade Superzero, he's in a youth group and there are scenes with the youth group and the youth group leader. And for a lot of people, it was very odd to have a traditionally published novel it's a big part of the story, but it wasn't like the problem of the story. And for some people, that was hard for them to wrap their heads around.
Well, it seems like there's this, in some segments, this stark line between quote unquote secular and quote unquote Christian. And, some books I know that have been deemed too religious, for the secular market, or for the religious market, the Christian market, they're not enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's funny, Madeline used to talk about that a lot in her workshop, that would happen with her books. And I like to write about kids, especially also in that age group, that are thinking about, like, these are the kids that I knew. Like, I was a youth group leader for a while, and like these were kids who had questions and wanted to sort of talk about faith and talk about their doubts and talk about what did it mean to be a person of faith in their daily lives, and what it meant for their parents, what it meant for them, what it meant in their community. And like, I think it's such a healthy thing for young people to have space to talk about that and figure it out, and just keep asking questions and know that they're probably not going to get all the answers, or they'll get very few, but the asking questions is a good thing.
Well, it's one of the benefits of writing a novel, right? Instead of nonfiction. It's okay to leave questions a lot.
Yeah.
So what other books then, have you written since then?
So since then, so I had a lot of fun co-authoring Two Naomi's and a sequel, Naomi's 2, with my friend Audrey Vernick. And that was something that kind of started out as a little joke between us, like, oh, what if one day we did this? But then we ended up doing it. And that was also fun because I'm a slow writer. I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about the story, and I really struggle through first drafts. Really, really struggle with first drafts. Once I have a first draft, I love revising. So I can revise and revise and revise. But so the great thing with the Naomi's books was that because we were working together, I didn't have time to agonize the way I normally would and just sort of like I had to like write my chapter so I could send it to her. We could keep going. So that was really, that was good for me. And I also did my first couple, I did a picture book biography, Someday Is Now, Clara Luper and the 1958 Oklahoma City sit-ins, which came about because I was actually trying to shop a manuscript about Ella Baker. And we weren't selling it. And then one editor said they didn't want that because they thought Ella Baker wasn't well known enough to have a biography. But would I be interested in writing about Clara Luper? And I thought that I knew a lot about the civil rights movement and a lot of activists, but I had never heard of Clara Luper. So I did some research and started getting into her story, and it was fascinating. So, and I got to work with Kevin Lewis, who's a picture book author and editor. And to be able to work with Kevin on my first picture book was amazing, because he just is so, so good. And just really helped me understand things about the page turn and about like even thinking about for picture books, when is the book going to be read? Is it going to be read at bedtime? Is it going to be read in the classroom? Is it going to be read in the library? And like how that affects the text of the story.
Wow.
And that was really helpful. And just learning how to leave room for the illustrator to tell part of the story. And I tend to write long and very wordy. So not trying to tell the whole story in words and thinking about that. So that was wonderful. I did another nonfiction book, Above and Beyond, NASA's Journey to Tomorrow. That was a really fun, like kind of dream of mine, and also dream of my dad. My dad always wanted me to be an engineer, and like was very sad that I had not gone to engineering school. And when I did go to college, I took this one astronomy course because I thought I was really into astronomy, and it had been a thing when I was little. But when I got to that course, I had such a hard time, and I was just doing really poorly. And there was this one graduate assistant TA who would not give up on me. And he was just like, I know you can do this. I know you can get it. And then when we got to Einstein and like theories of relativity and like that stuff, that was when, like, that was what I loved. And because it was like the stories and like sort of thinking in story. So that kind of like got me through the course. So then getting to do this book about a lot of that and just about telling stories about, I guess, like that movie Hidden Figures. So telling stories about just so many hidden figures involved in NASA's development and involved in our space exploration. And I really enjoy sort of telling those what seem like small stories, but just are really, really meaningful and really, really big in ways. So a lot of my work, fiction and nonfiction, ends up sort of being grounded in that.
Wow. So earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, you came out with a new book of your own, and you also edited another book. Is that right?
I did, yes. So the book I edited was The Hero Next Door, and that was for We Need Diverse Books. I was a board member of We Need Diverse Books, and The Hero Next Door is a middle grade anthology, and the founder of We Need Diverse Books, Ellen O, came to me because she had read my first book, 8th Grade Super Zero, and she liked the idea of thinking of the sort of the slogan for 8th Grade Super Zero was doing a small good thing can be a very big deal. And so just thinking about what are acts of courage in ordinary life. And so for A Hero Next Door, we went to all these fantastic authors and illustrators, just with a prompt, a very general prompt that just asked them to tell any story about everyday heroism or everyday courage. And it was so much fun to just kind of see all the different kinds of stories that they came back with, or the different ways that they interpreted the prompt. And then in April, I had It Doesn't Take a Genius come out with this gorgeous, gorgeous cover.
Yes.
Gordon James, this painting, I'm just in love with. And that is a companion to an independent film called Boy Genius. And so to work on It Doesn't Take a Genius, I had the script of the film and I watched the film and I thought about what could happen after the film is over. So the story kind of takes place after the film. And I really, there are two brothers in the film, and I was really interested in the relationship between the two brothers and sort of fleshing that out more and giving them space. It's very middle grade, giving them space to sort of think about who they are, who they want to be, and that kind of thing.
Wow, how cool. So have all the books that you've written then either been picture books or middle grade?
Yes. Thinking I contributed to a couple of anthologies also, like We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices, but Cheryl and Wade Hudson edited. But that, yeah, I would say that's middle grade. I should have my first young adult novel out in 2023. That's one of those drafts I'm struggling through right now. So.
Now, kind of lengthwise, is that going to be quite a bit longer than the middle grade books, or how do you relate?
It'll probably be about the same because I tend to be such a long.
You already write long middle grade books.
It's funny when Someday Is Now, the Clara Luper book came out, I did get a letter from a child who was like, I'm glad you wrote a book with pictures and not so many words.
For a change, did he say?
And that was definitely implied.
That's funny. And then you also have another book coming out in early 2022, is that right?
Yes, in January. I'm super excited about Operation Sisterhood. I am having such good fortune with covers. I think this cover is adorable. And it's about 4 sisters, and it's very much like a lot of the books that I used to read as a child, where there would be sort of these big happy families, like in Madeline's books, in Elizabeth Enright's books, where there were these big happy families. There was a lot of music. There was a lot of just sort of conversation and joy. And so I wanted to write one of those type of stories. It's set in New York City. I think a lot of times New York City children's books can not be very joyful, or people don't think of them as very joyful. So a lot of times, even if you just say, oh, it's set in New York City, people are like, oh, like it's going to be gritty or it's going to be tough. And this is kids being kids and having fun in the city and learning. They're a homeschooled family. And so like the city is really their classroom, and there's a lot of joy in it. It was hard to write during the pandemic, and trying to work on this very joyful story when there was just a lot of heaviness and sadness and the Black Lives Matter protests. And there was a lot that was sort of weighing on me. Mm-hmm. And really the main thing that got me through writing it was just really thinking about the readers and thinking about, okay, what do I want to give readers? And I kept writing something that was going in a direction that was sad in a way that, not that it was bad, but it also just wasn't what I wanted to give readers right now.
Mm. Interesting. Well, since so many of us had to stay inside more or less too, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if the city is your classroom and,
It
your
was
classroom
very
closed
hard.
off.
It was really hard. I was so used to, like, I like writing in libraries. So I tend to go around all the branch libraries to work. So I wasn't doing that. I took for granted that I would just be freely moving about the city. And so I wasn't doing that either. So it was hard.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So I've heard from some, picture book authors in particular that they don't really get to interact much with the illustrator.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I've heard that that's not the case, but what's your experience been on that?
My experiences has been the same. I didn't with the Clara Luper book. I did not interact with the illustrator until after the book was published. I have another picture book coming out next summer. I have not interacted with the illustrator at all. I've seen some sketches and a really gorgeous cover, but I did work on a short piece for like a graphic, sort of like a comic anthology. And in that one, I knew the illustrator. And so I did reach out to her and we communicated, but the publisher didn't know. Like, I don't think that for the most part, the publishers would prefer that we don't interact.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just counterintuitive. I mean, I can understand the logic behind it too, but it's just kind of surprising for those of us that are not as familiar.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I mean, but yeah, I can see how it might protect both. But then also sometimes the communication would just facilitate things.
Sure. But, I assume that you have a lot of communication with your editor.
Yes.
On any of those books.
Yeah. And that's, and it's fun. I've worked with a lot of different editors and I still work with a lot of different editors. And it's just helpful for me to sort of work with all these different styles and work on getting better, like sort of with all these different coaches almost.
So I know you talked about the new one coming out in early 2022 and then the other one that you're working on in 23. Anything you want to share with folks about beyond that in terms of just general ideas or
sure. Yeah. I have another nonfiction book coming out in the spring of 2022.
Wow.
Called Saving Earth, about the climate crisis. And that was also a really, really hard book to work on. It started out as a middle grade adaptation of the book Losing Earth by Nathaniel Rich. And now it's more of a middle grade companion to it because it ended up sort of getting away from a lot of the text of that book. But it was a struggle to write about something that is also just very, very sad and hard. And so, but it was also interesting to sort of, because just in going through the history, sort of looking at, wow, there were so many people around the world who have been working on this for decades and who have been sort of talking about this and doing all kinds of interesting things that maybe, particularly in this country, we weren't paying attention to. And so sort of trying to shine a light on those was interesting. And then I have 1, 2, 3. I know I have 4 books for 2022. I'm trying to, I think I've said them all. And then after that, I have a modern Black history nonfiction book, sort of a global, thinking about Black freedom movements around the world after the, what we call the civil rights movement here. So like post 1968. and sort of thinking about it through the lens of like my identity as someone who was like born in New York, but my mother was from Jamaica and my father was from Nigeria. So like a first generation person with sort of ties around across the diaspora. And I will have some easy readers coming soon. I'm very excited about those because
Wow. Well, you are a prolific writer. My goodness.
I am just
You're very productive.
trying to keep working.
Wow. It's just so exciting to hear about all of that, though, really. I mean, good for you. Congratulations.
They're good challenges to work in all these different areas. I feel like working in one just makes me better in the others. And I find it really, really helpful to just keep challenging myself to grow as a writer.
So a lot of the folks that, view our videos are much earlier stage writers than you are. What advice would you have for them?
Well, for me, it was helpful to be a big reader and to read widely. So I do tend to tell people to read and to read widely and to every once in a while read something that you wouldn't normally pick up or that it's just very different for you just to see. But I do know a lot of writers who didn't grow up as big readers. And I think I think we read the world in different ways. So I think however you read the world and whatever you enjoy, feel free to keep doing it and let that inform how you develop as a storyteller. So for a lot of people, it's comics. For a lot of people, it's television. And just like letting that inform how you write and how you think about writing and just looking at the things you love as models, I think those can be sort of the best workshops in a lot of ways. I will tell students a lot of times to storyboard the books that they really, really love. And storyboarding it can help you see what your favorite authors and creators are doing that makes you love their work so much. And my other piece of advice is to be forgiving, to be generous with yourself as a creative person, as a writer, and not feel like all of the advice, even the advice that I give, has to apply to you. So if it doesn't apply to you, it's okay. It just doesn't apply to you. It doesn't mean that you're not a real writer, or for a lot of people, it's like, if you don't write every day, you're not a real writer. I don't think that's true. Or if you don't publish your work, you're not a real writer. That's not true. Like, I think we tell stories and it's okay to just be figuring out how that's going to work for you.
So I have to ask you about another area too, because it's so important in like adult nonfiction, which is a little bit more where I tend to, deal with authors in that space, which is platform, right? And, many times that means being active on social media.
Yeah.
So whereas with children's books, it seemed like, generally speaking, that's not as much of an issue. Not that it's not, but I mean, where do you stand on all of that in terms of, your own activities, your own priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, and from a publisher's point of view, they would want me to be more active on social media. Like, publishers do like it, and they do pay attention to who is very active and who already has a platform. So it is something that publishers pay attention to. For me, I just do, before I was published, I kept a craft blog for a long time, just like about knitting and sewing and toys and stuff. So I did that because I enjoyed it and I liked interacting with that community, and and it was also sort of a part of my creative process and my writing process. So I've kind of stayed in that vein. So I use Instagram a lot, but mostly either to talk about making things and crafts to like I like to walk around and take pictures of the city and like for that kind of thing. And then I use Twitter mostly to talk about literacy and education because those are also just passions of mine. So I feel like when you use it in that way, where it's grounded in what you already love or what you already do, then at least for me, it's not, then that way it's not draining. If I have to think about it as like how to make myself look like a successful author, or if I think about it too platformy, I get very anxious. And I just think in the end, it doesn't serve the work. It's not what I'm here for. Like, it's just, but
Sure.
for some people, I think it does fuel them and
Oh,
it does
yeah.
fuel their process. And so for them, it's like
Dramatically different views on this, you know, from
yeah,
one person to the next. There's no question
yeah,
about that.
yeah. Some people really love it or really feel like it's essential for their work. So I think it's really a matter of figuring out what helps you sort of do the best at what you really want to do and what supports that.
Sure, sure. Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with us to tell us about your books and your thinking on all these different topics. I really appreciate that. And congratulations on all the accomplishments that you've had. They're just phenomenal.
Yeah. It is definitely just God's blessing. And I'm so grateful and humbled by it that I'm able to keep working and to just keep learning and to just keep being around books and people that love books and stories.
Good, good. Well, you do it very well. So, and you help a lot of people. So you influence a lot of kids, which is
Thank you.
nothing better than that. So we look forward to our upcoming conference and, working together for that too.
I'm very excited about it. Looking forward to it.
And again, you can find out about all the books at Olugbemisolabooks.com. So please check it out.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Brian.
Thanks again.
Bye.